Here we go.
Here we
Friday
go.
again.
It is Friday, December the 11th. Another week, another hot week in tech. That was the week, number 48. And Keith, this was the week in which Facebook has at least been accused of being a monopoly by the government in Washington, D.C., the powers that be. I know you have strong feelings on this. So do I. I don't think we want to turn it into a legal dispute. Neither of us are lawyers. But very briefly, what's your position on this? The latest developments on the Facebook story.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say is I dislike Facebook as much as you do. I don't think they're necessarily good people. I think they do a pretty bad job of showing me things I'm interested in versus targeting me with ads. I don't spend a lot of time there other than to engage with old friends or family. So whatever I'm about to say is not pro Facebook. It's pro facts. Facebook has one market. In other words, it sells one thing: advertising. I advertise a lot. I buy ads. And when I buy ads, there's a lot of choice. Facebook, Twitter,
You
Snapchat.
do? What do you buy ads for?
For startups that I work with.
Oh, I see.
There's a lot of choice, and Facebook isn't even the biggest choice. So I think words matter, and the word monopoly has a meaning. I just don't think they are one. And so to accuse them of being one is harsh. It's even worse when they're going back 8 years to the Instagram acquisition and trying to re-legislate that acquisition 8 years later. I wrote an article for TechCrunch at that time, which I point to in the newsletter, which pointed out that Facebook was seriously in danger of being outmaneuvered by mobile at that time. Facebook was largely a web company then. It really hadn't developed its mobile app very much. And what it was doing by buying Instagram was a life-saving act of a weak company, not a power act of a monopoly. And so, it's pretty hard from the point of view of today to say that acquisition, is an appropriate moment to designate Facebook as a monopoly. So I just think words matter. And I think the zeitgeist, which is hate Facebook, which I share, by the way, is allowing us to spill over into a world of criminality, or bad behavior that can be punished by breakup that just isn't appropriate.
Well, you'll be pleased to, or surprised to know, I don't really disagree with what you're saying. I'm pleased that you publicly acknowledge that you hate Facebook. I think we all hate Facebook. Sheryl and Zuckerberg in particular, I think, are bad people. I think they're profoundly dishonest, and I think the product itself has done great damage to society. But that doesn't justify a government investigation into monopoly. I think there's probably better ways of taking them on, and I'm not sure you're necessarily wrong on the monopoly front. I wrote when Facebook acquired Instagram, I was writing the internet's not the answer back then, and I thought that them paying $1.5 billion for them, just as I thought Google paying $1.5 billion for YouTube was very short-sighted. Shows how much I know. Shows why I'm not a venture capitalist or an investor. So I don't necessarily disagree. What I'm interested, there's a couple of things I think are worth talking about. Firstly, why they chose Facebook over Google, given that Facebook, in my mind, is not as powerful or as disruptive or as dangerous.
Well, interestingly enough, there is a case against Google as well, which came out a couple of weeks ago. So actually, they're running two simultaneous cases, accusing both of being monopolies when actually they compete in the same market for advertising. So that's kind of interesting that you can have two monopolies in a market that neither one of them owns.
Yeah, but I think that I think you can argue that Google is more of a monopoly. I mean, the monopoly case against Google is a much. I don't want to get into the law because I'm not a lawyer, but I think is legally more persuasive.
I think that would be true.
Search.
My belief is that, I'm not a lawyer either, so I'm just trying to be logical, of which, of course, you can't be with the law. But I don't think search is a market. If it was, you could argue Google's a monopoly. And I don't think social networking is a market. If it was, you still couldn't argue that Facebook's a monopoly because of TikTok. I nearly called TikTok Zigzag then for some reason. That's interesting. TikTok, Snapchat, you know, and so on.
I mean, to me, yeah, I agree. And to me, the weird thing about the WhatsApp acquisition, I still don't understand this.
Yeah, well,
how they can possibly monetize WhatsApp without turning it into a surveillance tool. I don't know.
Yeah.
Where's the money in WhatsApp? I mean, how much did they spend? 20 billion?
19 billion, which was...
Are they generating any revenue from WhatsApp?
So one of the good things about the FTC case is there's some documentation hidden in there that explains some of this stuff. And it's to do with what Mark Zuckerberg calls user mechanics. So basically, if you think of Facebook as a centralized social graph, and the FTC defines a social network as software that sits on a social graph. Instagram clearly fits into that. Things like friend following and targeting and notifications and alerts. WhatsApp doesn't. WhatsApp is a private messaging service, encrypted, by the way.
And free.
And free. So the purpose of WhatsApp actually is something different. And it comes out in the FTC case in the emails that they uncovered, which is Facebook wanted to build Facebook Messenger into a first-class messaging app, didn't have time, and bought WhatsApp effectively to shut it down.
Is that legal?
Absolutely legal, because it isn't a market. It's a feature. It's a feature they wanted to own. Now, if you look at the rise of Facebook Messenger since 2014, it's huge. And it is as big or bigger than WhatsApp now. But they haven't closed WhatsApp down because WhatsApp has a very loyal user base. I use it, for example, with my South African family.
All right.
So I think the purpose was served because Facebook Messenger learned everything it needed to.
Right. So let's wind the clock back, Keith. Let's say we were having this conversation in 1996, 1997, and it was about Microsoft.
Yeah.
Now, you've got the tech hater me being thrilled with this, and you've got the tech investor entrepreneur you being a little nervous about it. I think I would have made the argument back then that attacking Microsoft as a monopoly, whether or not it really is a monopoly, and I would have assumed back then you would have probably defended Microsoft.
I did, actually.
And Microsoft killed your startup. So again, that's a story. Well, that's another story. But let me finish here, because I think in this area I do have a strong argument. I would have made the argument back then that it's not in the interests of innovators, of startups, of investors, of entrepreneurs to have such a dominant company as Microsoft dominating the web and desktop publishing. You would have pushed, I'm not putting words into your mouth, but in terms of today's debate, you might have said, well, these big companies have great products and I'm against this authoritarianism coming from government. Back then, had you not had the breakup of Microsoft, or at least the attacks, these enormous attacks on Microsoft, which forced them to take their eye off the ball, you wouldn't have had Google, you wouldn't have had Facebook, you wouldn't have had Web 2.0. So surely, whilst I agree that the legal foundations of the case against Facebook and Google are at best dodgy, it's actually good for startup entrepreneurs and investors like you and I, because it forces these huge companies to address legal stuff and forces them to take their eye off the ball, and opens up wonderfully exciting new markets, which we can't imagine. You couldn't have imagined Web 2.0 in 1997.
Well, so I was very involved.
Right.
I've been involved then, and I was, by the way, I wrote an article called Dear Zuck Fuck, which you can search, when Facebook almost exactly copied my app Chat Center. So I've been on the receiving end of both
Okay,
companies.
but address this issue of.
So let's go back to that. So firstly, just historically, Google. When I met Larry and Sergey, it was in 1997, and my
Right.
company Real Names did a deal with them, and I also did a deal with Microsoft. And so Google and Microsoft had MSN, which was a very poor search engine. It later became Bing. And at that time, there was intense competition between Microsoft and Google won. Now, Web 2.0 came later. 2005 is when I would date the start of Web 2.0.
Well, but that may be the subject of another show. I was
going to say, if you wanted to try to assess what it was that helped people compete with Microsoft, and you had two options: Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer not understanding Web 2.0 and mobile,
right,
or the DOJ punishing Microsoft, I would choose the first.
I would say they're both. You can't say one. They both contributed. And certainly, Microsoft would not have allowed Google to survive had they got away with their bullying of Netscape. Because Google was just another version of Netscape, taking on one of their core markets, right?
Well, the classic example there is Internet Explorer and Netscape. You're right. So I had a deal with Internet Explorer. Real Names was, by the way, I actually was the monopoly. Real Names owned the address bar that you type into. Microsoft sent every single thing typed into us, and we decided what to do with it.
No wonder they shut you down.
Now, at that time, in 2000-ish, Microsoft's worldwide browser share was 98%, whereas 6 years earlier, it didn't have a browser. And so it leveraged the operating system ownership into killing Netscape by giving away a free browser and forcing Netscape into the enterprise sales business for server software. Now, Netscape, my good friend Barbara Gore ran the Netscape website in those days. Netscape didn't understand what people later understood was that if you own a browser, you can monetize it through advertising, and that you should give it away for free, and that so monetization hadn't evolved. So if you really want to understand that period's complexities, it isn't all about, in fact, when my company Real Names closed down because Microsoft chose to discontinue our service in the address bar, it wasn't big bad monopoly Microsoft making that decision. It was actually scared Microsoft that was afraid that the DOJ wouldn't allow them to own the world's language through the address bar. And so they were cowering before the DOJ. They were a weak and weakened company. By the way, that's what led to me closing down Real Names, not their strength, but their weakness.
It's an interesting conversation. It can never be proved, but my sense is this is what's going to happen. We're repeating history, that Facebook and Google are the Microsofts of the future. But you did provide a wonderful segue to our next segment, Keith. You mentioned Netscape, and there are misunderstanding of other business models and the advertising model. Of course, the guy we most associate with Netscape, Marc Andreessen, had a second or perhaps a third act, a remarkable character, perhaps Silicon Valley's most brilliant thinker and investor and technologist. This is a week where Andreessen, or Andreessen Horowitz, his venture capital firm, is celebrating a number of victories. So Netscape is back in the form, at least, of Marc Andreessen, and they're the ones who have won out, ironically, in the long run.
Yeah, Marc Andreessen is nothing except exceptional. Few things this week. One, he's an investor in a bunch of IPOs, but he also dominates the innovation section of That Was the Week, where there's a few things there. Number one, he thinks that social and fintech will fuse into a whole new set of applications where things like Robinhood, which the kids are all using to invest in stocks and Bitcoin, will become more and more social, and that money and social will kind of come together. He also has one called The Next Phase of Social, Listen Closely, which is all about the rise of audio. Andrew Chen wrote that from Andreessen Horowitz. And then he has 6 ways new social companies will monetize, which is of great interest to people like yourself who are thinking of doing startups, where he talks about VIP subscriptions, commerce tools on platforms, virtual live experiences, which is what we're doing now, interest-based paid communities, which is kind of interesting, digital goods sold in apps through currencies, and also tipping, donations and microtransactions. So this was a week that Andreessen has a kind of a content production facility now within the firm. And that content production facility is pumping stuff out faster than ever before, mining the ideas from inside the firm and publishing them. And they're quite interesting, and it just shows how innovative that firm is. But the real story of the week, of course, is the IPOs.
Yeah.
Which Airbnb and DoorDash dominate, but Tom Siebel's C3 artificial intelligence company also doubled in valuation on an IPO this week.
So explain the Airbnb one. Why did it pop so successfully, given clearly the impact, the negative impact of COVID on the travel industry? Why are people still so bullish on Airbnb?
Well, the answer is held in deep antagonistic arguments in Silicon Valley. We've talked about Bill Gurley before. He would argue that it popped because it was underpriced.
So that comes back to your SPAC stuff, right?
And the SPAC stuff. Now, it is true that after the pop, Airbnb is priced at roughly 30 times revenue. And 30 times revenue is what Snowflake was priced at, and it's also what DoorDash is now priced at, which also popped. So 30 times revenue is, you normally say a company that's growing 20% a year will trade at roughly 10 times revenue. These companies are growing a lot faster than 20% a year.
So DoorDash is sort of the other end of the debate, in the sense that DoorDash is clearly benefiting from the COVID economy, whereas Airbnb clearly has been damaged by the COVID economy, and yet both seem to have done very well this week. Is it just because no one else has anything to invest in, or there's a lot of money out there, or
it's all of the,
you're going to tell the world now?
It's all of the above, Andrew. There is a lot of money out there sitting on the sidelines. Airbnb has had a very impressive quarter comeback, even during COVID. The last quarter was quite a comeback quarter, and its revenues were driving higher again. And DoorDash, of course, has just exploded during COVID, and is more and more relevant to more and more people in more and more places. So I think it's interesting. My son, one of my sons, turned 18 this week, and he wanted Robinhood on his phone, and his birthday present was put some money in a Robinhood account, and he's preoccupied with what to invest in. Yeah. Young people are actually once again interested in the stock market in the way we were back in the late 90s. Well, and I think that's driving a lot of it.
Money for stock. I lost all my money on Audio Cafe. There was a piece which I forgot to send to you about the dangers of Robinhood in terms of the bubble. Are you concerned, or would you be concerned, that a whole generation of kids like you are treating Robinhood as if it's sort of an accessible William Hill or Las Vegas casino? None of them have any idea of what they're doing, and in creating these very unnatural bubbles, it seems as if Tesla has benefited from this too, and that these kids are investing in personalities like Elon Musk or concepts like DoorDash because they like to get takeaway food.
Well, there's always dangers in that. There's one rule of the stock market, which is somebody loses. And the loser tends to be the least informed, and trends are not your friend in the stock market. That said, I'm a parent of 3 boys. All my boys have Robinhood accounts, and I'm using it to teach them all of this stuff, because they want to do it anyway. So you may as well engage with them. And the biggest thing we talk about is long-term investing versus short-term.
Keith, I got to get the door. 1 second. You continue talking. I'll be back in 1 second.
Yeah, well, I'll tell our viewers a little story while Andrew opens the door. I lost a lot of money day trading before I learned this lesson, and I think the idea that you can time the ups and downs of the market and sell at the top and buy at the bottom is almost impossible to do. So I think you're right, Andrew, that Robinhood represents young people being engaged with investment. It has dangers, but it's mainly a good thing because they're learning about the way the world works, I would say. And he isn't back, so I'm going to turn the browser back on, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what else happened this week.
Keith, it was DoorDash with my lunch.
DoorDash. I was just saying, Andrew, Robinhood actually announced this week. I didn't announce, but it leaked that they've hired Goldman Sachs to do their own IPO. Possibly valued at as high as 20 billion. And if you ask yourself the question, would you invest in Robinhood? I think the answer would have to be yes.
So very briefly, what is Robinhood? How would you describe it?
It's like E-Trade, except it pioneered free trades. It makes its money by selling your trades to brokers who execute them, and it gets paid a fee for the trade. So actually its revenues are trade sensitive. The more trades happen, the more money it makes. So it encourages trades.
So how does your sons, what is extracted from them? Is this part of some people would call it the surveillance capitalist economy? How are they paying?
They don't really pay. It's a marketplace. So my son represents the buyer side of the marketplace, and the brokers are the seller side of the marketplace. And Robinhood's in the middle, taking money from the broker in exchange for passing the broker the customer.
But who's paying the broker?
The broker gets paid on the delta between the ask price and the bid price on the trade. In the way that any brokerage works. So it's actually extremely profitable. The other thing they've done is they've integrated Bitcoin. Like in my E-Trade account, I can't buy Bitcoin, so I've got to buy a stock that tracks Bitcoin. But in Robinhood, you can actually buy Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as well, which my kids are attracted to doing.
And so there've been a lot of talk of the IPOs this week of being like the bubble of the late 90s. When you put Robinhood and crypto and the frenzied IPO market, are we on the brink of another meltdown, another Black Friday?
Well, that's this Sequoia Capital warned of that earlier in this year. And so far, at least, they've been, to their own advantage, by the way, proven to be completely wrong. This is the stock market.
The year is so strange because of COVID. It would have been impossible to predict anything this year, given what happened, right?
Yeah, well, you couldn't have predicted that, but I think if it wasn't for COVID, they may have had a point. But what COVID did is it accelerated all the digital infrastructure that has to compensate for the inability to engage with physical infrastructure. And so some companies have just got really big, really fast.
And when people look back, because this is the last show we do, Keith, in 2020, you are going to South Africa for the rest of the year. When historians in 2030 or 40, tech historians, business historians, look back at 2020, what are they going to most remember? Is it going to be this assault on big tech of Google and Facebook? Is it going to be the successful IPOs? Is it going to be the appearance of new tech platforms and the increasing mainstreaming of crypto? What do you think is the most memorable events of this year from a historical point of view?
I would say that Facebook, once again, is at a point where it may represent its peak. I think what we're doing here with Restream and Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, what Substack is doing with newsletters, what we're doing in our Telegram channel, which is shown here, where you can get a live real-time version of the newsletter day by day as the articles come out. They appear there in that Telegram channel. Real-time newsletters, real-time video and audio with audiences, where Facebook is just a distribution channel for us, not the center of our world. And newsletters. I think looking back, this is going to be a very significant moment where the internet changes from, being owned by a walled garden provider like Facebook to being a tool that we all sit on top of, and all of us become powerful.
We heard that one from Tim O'Reilly and John Battelle in 2003, whenever they invented the term Web 2.0, and look what happened. So history is really repeating itself. One thing that never changes, Keith, it seems, the one thing that's immune from everything is email. It's always been the killer app. And you've got 2 tweets of the week this week. One of your tweets of the week is about email, which I think is a good one. Perhaps you might put it up. Yeah,
this is Oren Hoffman, who's appeared once before on.
Yes, Oren, our old friend.
He makes the point that successful people are really good at returning emails.
Yeah.
And he asks whether there's a correlation or a causation there. And I think both you and me have had this experience. I hope it means I'm successful, because I am religious about returning emails. I would never blank someone.
I'm at the other end, though. I'm very unsuccessful, and I always return emails because I've got nothing else to do. You're very successful and very busy, but you return emails.
I have a habit that I get to email 0 every day. I never go to bed with an email unanswered.
I'm at email 0 every 10 minutes. What about that middle sector? Because that's what really annoys me, Keith. Firstly, I think it's incredibly rude. And as we're suggesting, it's also unwise. It doesn't make you any friends. It reflects incompetence and selfishness and short-sightedness. Why don't people return emails? It's so rude.
I don't, I hate to be, kind of ethnic about this, but I think Americans don't have a concept of rude. I think it's basically functional. It goes back to the Protestant ethic and empiricism, which is they live in a world of facts, not nuance. And if they're not interested, they just don't reply, and they're not guilty about doing it either.
Yeah, I'm continually bemused especially when you write somebody an email that's personalized and they just don't respond. It's astonishing. And I agree with Oren. When I'm pitching someone, say for one of the Now TV shows, whenever I email someone who's really famous, best-selling author, a very famous entrepreneur or investor, they'll always get back to me. And often, like Mike Moritz, I remember emailing him out the blue, and he wrote me a very polite email back saying, "I'm sorry, I can't do this."
Yeah.
Half successful people just don't. So if you want to be really successful, respond to emails. What about the startup of the week, Keith? Another hot company.
Yeah, the startup of the week actually is it's out of Manchester, England.
Where's that?
It's close to Liverpool and a long way away from Tottenham.
Always below Liverpool, though, right?
It is. So the startup of the week, I'm just finding it before we put it on screen, and having difficulty doing it, hence my hesitation, but I will get there any second now. It's called Hopin. And Hopin is, it kind of speaks to what I said before about 2030 or 2040. Hopin, this is an interview between Harry Stebbings, who is an awesome young man in England who has joined a venture capital firm called Stride. And he has a podcast called The 20-Minute VC, where he interviews the Hopin CEO. Hopin is valued at £2 billion, so about $2.6 billion, 13 months after being founded. And it's a platform for virtual events. So if you have a conference or an exhibition or a combination of the two, you can go to Hopin and you can create the meeting rooms, the seminars, the speakers, the exhibits, the tables, the sidebar, networking rooms, all the stuff you would associate with an event, they do virtually, and they've really taken off. There's a couple of other companies in their space doing well as well, but they really deserve to be Startup of the Week because they've understood COVID, benefited from it, and helped us all continue working during it.
Are you an investor or are you dispassionate on this one?
I am not an investor. I wish I was.
You missed it? And isn't your VC firm based in Manchester too?
Not based in Manchester, but we certainly invest in Manchester. We have.
How did you miss that one, Keith?
I think it passed us by because it was an inside deal between some VCs that already knew founders. It never came on the market.
Well, however bad you feel, Chris Sacca feels worse. So that's the other tweet of the week. You might put Sacca's email up.
This is his tweet. Congratulations to Airbnb, the founding team, all high quality people with a strong ethical compass. I fear extreme FOMO because I passed on their seed deal telling them, quote, somebody will get murdered and the blood will be on your hands, unquote. An all-time 3 fuck up.
Yeah, well, Chris can be, I think he can enjoy that because he's made billions elsewhere, but it is, God knows what what that investment would be worth. What would you guess? What would a $50,000 investment? What do you think the founder round would have been?
I did the math last week. You would get the people who invested in the seed round are at 70,000 times their investment.
So a 50,000 investment would be what? 350 million.
It's whatever 50,000 times 70,000 is. I've got a nice little calculator here, and I can actually do it for you. 50,000 multiplied by 70,000 equals 3.5 billion. Is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? 3.5 billion.
Who was in that round? Do you know?
I can tell you who was in that round. Do you want to know?
Not really. It'll just make me too envious. Keith, imagine if you were in that round, you could have hired you would have bought your own aeroplane to fly you and your family to South Africa for the break.
I don't know. I'm scared of airplanes that are for small groups. I'd rather.
You could have bought a 747.
I could have bought
Harry and Sergey and taken your family and all your friends and indeed everyone who watches That Was the Week to South Africa for the holidays. I know you're not going to be here for the next 2 weeks. How are we going to survive, Keith, without That Was the Week?
We're going to enjoy some holiday cheer for Hanukkah.
No holiday cheering, COVID. We're all stuck at home except for you.
And then we're going to enjoy the new year, and then we're probably all going to get vaccinated, and then it's all going to get back to normal roughly around June, I think.
Roughly around June. So we still have 6 months more of this, 6 months more of That Was the Week, done virtually, and then maybe once we get back to normal, we can do it in person. So Happy New Year, Keith. Happy New Year to all our listeners and viewers, and we will see you in early January.
We will.